Hi guys, and welcome to another video. This is the second part of what I'm calling my critical thinking series. So this is coming from a Christian perspective on critical thinking and why I think it's one of the most dangerous, or I guess I should say why the lack of critical thinking is one of the most dangerous offenses to Christianity and to the church and to individual believers. I think that, even in the church, we have such a low retention rate of our children. I think the number I've always heard is somewhere around 50%. So that's obviously not great. And in my first video, I kind of talked about, can we know truth and how can we find truth and how can we distinguish. I mean, we may hear a lot of really great ideas, but how can we distinguish which one is actually correct? Is it just the smartest person in the room? Because that could change day to day. And, depending on the area of expertise, it's going to change. So that was kind of what my first video was addressing. And then in this video, I wanted to talk about something a little bit different. And this is something I'm definitely not an expert in, but I've dabbled in. So I'm kind of titling this one or thinking of this one as a way to talk about kind of a common, I feel like a lot of people kind of act like, do you believe the Bible or science? And so we're kind of addressing that here. Like, critical thinking and the Bible and Christianity versus science. And even in my notes, I have critical thinking versus ? Science, because I don't really think it's a versus. I don't think that they're opposing viewpoints. In fact, I think that they are 100% completely harmonious with each other, okay? Now, don't be getting any crazy ideas. I'm not like a Scientologist or anything weird. I just believe, I'll get into it in just a second. You'll completely understand where I'm coming from. But I wanted to take my first video in this series and kind of address it on an individual basis. But in this video, I really wanted to talk about, like, on a larger scale, how can we specifically, almost apologetics, how can we specifically address atheism and evolution? I feel like that is such a not even just a common belief, but it's kind of the default belief. Like, it's what's taught in schools. It's what many people kind of ascribe to. And they're like, I'm just going to believe in nothing until I'm proven otherwise. And I'm like, that doesn't really make a lot of sense if you think about it. And I know a lot of times we equate science with atheism, like those two things go hand in hand, but that is just 100% wrong. And, all these activists, it always cracks me up because that whole, I don't know if you guys have ever seen these like signs or bumper stickers or whatever, but it's like, in this household, we believe science is real and, love is love and Black Lives Matter and, whatever. And it's kind of these activists who are pointing themselves out to be, like far left type leaning people. And it's just interesting because I would also say that all those statements are true. I just mean them in a very different way than they're meaning them. Like, of course, Black Lives Matter. Of course, love is love. Like, what is that? What is it? What point are you even trying to making with that? And of course, science is real, which is the one that we're kind of going to be addressing today. So my first point is that, okay, well, let's just talk about creation, right? So Genesis 1, God created the heavens and the earth. It's right there. And it's just so funny to me because, we talk about the laws of this and that. And it's like, yeah, so according to the laws of this and that, God can't exist. And I'm like, no, like you have it completely backwards. Because there are laws of this and that means God does exist. Like, just the fact that there are laws means that God does exist. And for people who kind of want to say, oh, well, you either can believe God or you can believe science. Like, God created science. Do we understand that? Like, God created the elements. God created people. God created the brain. God created the stars. Like, whichever type of science you want to talk about, like we're going to talk about biology, God created the plants. He created cells. You want to talk about chemistry. Yeah, he created all the elements. He created atoms, and what else are they even called? Like neutrons and electrons and all that. Like he created all of that. You want to talk about what even else is there? Physics. He created gravity. He created all of this stuff. And so to say that those two things are contrary is just absolutely bonkers. It makes no sense. And so I just feel like in discussions like this, people always want to start off with the assumption of it's one versus the other. Even Christians can often be guilty of this. And I know, like, as a young person, I was always interested in like science and the medical field and things like that. And I remember going to my parents and being like, I want to be like a scientist when I'm older, like go into some scientific field. Like, how can I still be a Christian if I like want to be a scientist? And, you know, maybe that was just my experience, but like somehow, some way, an idea was put into my head that you can't believe in science and God. And so I just want to start this conversation off with the opposite, okay? God is science. God created science. And any science that goes against God is not real science, okay? Okay, like let's just get that straightened out. Now, I will say this. Nature, science, the laws of nature, all that, obey God, not vice versa. So sometimes we want to look at things and we want to be like, oh, but this. And I'm like, yeah, because God did that. Oh, well, this tree is such and such years old. Okay, let's assume you're right. Okay, well, so then God did that. He made a tree that was already that old. Like he did that. Okay, you want to talk about why there's fossils on mountains and stuff? Why there's fish fossils on mountains? It's not because of evolution. It's, and because fish used to live on top of the mountain. No, like that's absurd. It's because God flooded the earth. You want to talk about evidence for your ice age? Because God created a catastrophe in the flood. And honestly, the flood answers so many questions that atheists have come up with so many crazy explanations to, that there is not only really no other evidence for, but also that there's evidence contrary to. And it's just, again, why is this the default? Why is going out on this crazy limb about this huge climate change that we just really have no evidence for? It's like, or you could just believe that what the Bible says, that there was a flood that flooded the whole earth. And even the tops of the mountains were 15 cubits covered by water. Like it was a full on flood that flooded the entire earth. All the mountains were covered, all that. Okay. And there has been more catastrophic events since then, not maybe to the same scale, but we know God's power over nature, and he's exhibited it time and time again, okay? Let's just talk about Matthew 8:23 through 27. Now, when he, being Jesus, got into a boat, his disciples followed him, and suddenly a great tempest arose on the sea, so that the boat was covered with waves. But he was asleep, meaning Jesus. Then his disciples came to him and awoke him, saying, Lord, save us, we're perishing. But he said to them, why are you fearful, O you of little faith? Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. So the men marveled, saying, who can this be, that even the winds and the sea obey him? Okay? Nature obeys God, not vice versa. I have other verses written down. Let's just flip to those really fast and see what they have to say, just to drive my point home. Because it wasn't just when Jesus was actually here on earth that miracles were done and that God had full reign over nature. Okay, let's go back to Joshua chapter 10, verses 11 through 14. And it happened as they fled before Israel and were on the descent of Beth Horon, that the Lord cast down large hailstones from heaven on them as far as Ezekah, and they died. So the people that the Israelites were fighting, God specifically threw hail at them, and they died. There were more who died from the hailstones than the children of Israel killed with the sword. Then Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Aijalon. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped till the people had revenge upon their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day. And after there has been no day like that, before it or after it, that the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. And then, I'm not even going to read this one. Most of us know this story, but it's in Exodus 14, the parting of the Red Sea. And then let's flip to James chapter 5 and read verses 17 and 18. I don't usually use my paper Bible when I'm doing videos like this. I usually just have the verses pulled up on my phone, but I really enjoy reading out of a paper Bible. So that's what I'm doing today. All right, James chapter 5, verses 17 and 18. Elijah was a man with nature like ours, and he prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3 years and 6 months. And he prayed again, and the heaven gave rain, and the earth produced its fruit. So obviously this is referencing Elijah, but I just thought that this verse in James summed it up really well, because obviously Elijah was in the Old Testament, but I'm reading from the New Testament because it just summarizes it really well. And then, and then just miracles in general that Jesus did, the resurrection, okay, those are all acts contrary to nature. But that is exactly what a miracle is. It's something done that has no natural explanation. And that's what makes it miraculous, right? So Jesus and God did these miracles so that people would know, hey, this guy has power over nature. So it's so funny to me because scoffers, atheists, people who are skeptical against Jesus, they're like, well, there's no way that's true. That's not possible. And I'm like, yeah, that's the point. It's not possible unless you're God and you have full rule and dominion over nature and time and the stars and the moon. I mean, they have full power over creation because they created everything. They made the laws. And so, yeah, you're right. Resurrection from the dead is impossible unless you're God. Okay, or unless God grants you as a human that power, because we do see that humans have the power to do miracles in the Bible, and before in the Old Testament, before Jesus came, there were prophets and other patriarchs that were able to do miracles because God granted them that power. And we also see actually someone in the New Testament was going up against Jesus, and they're like, oh, well, if you're able to do this, you're either from God or you're from Satan. And, basically that's the point. Like he has an otherworldly power. He's either from God or from Satan, but we know that he's from God, and it would make no sense for him to do all of the great benevolent deeds he did and die for us if he was from Satan. That would make no sense. So, yes. So that is how nature, just a proof from the Bible of how nature obeys God and not vice versa. But if that's not convincing to you and you're like, okay, Deidre, here's the thing. I don't believe the Bible. So that's really not going to be a very convincing argument for me. Like, okay, so the Bible says that God has superpowers. Well, I don't believe the Bible, so therefore I don't believe God has superpowers. Okay, well, let's just think about this critically, right? That's the point of this series. Let's look at the law of thermodynamics. So the law of thermodynamics, again, this is slightly out of my wheelhouse. I am somewhat educated in science. I've read Hawkins and Darwin, and I studied science to an extent in college. And so I'm somewhat educated, but do I have all of, Darwin and Hawkins memorized? Absolutely not. Did I understand everything that Hawkins was saying when he wrote it down? Absolutely not. But I know just enough to be dangerous, okay? And so I know that the law of thermodynamics basically explains how things work in a closed system, which would include our universe, okay? And so the first law of thermodynamics, I'm sure you've heard of it. It's called the conservation of energy, or in other words, how most people state it is that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. So when I use up energy, right, like I eat food, so I consume energy, and then I do work, so I'm using energy. Does that energy disappear? No, it's just put into another form. Maybe it's put into kinetic energy when I move something or whatever. But energy cannot be created or destroyed. So just thinking critically about that. To me, okay, a scientist wants to say science is real, the Bible is not. Okay, well, explain to me scientifically how the universe was created. Can you do that? Without contradicting science, because the first law of thermodynamics literally states that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. So please tell me how all of the energy in the universe came from nothing, zero energy. And if you want to tell me something about how there was all this potential energy that eventually converted into kinetic energy, so that's not creating energy, it just converted. Okay, well, how was the potential energy there in the first place? How was it there? The energy of one kind or another had to be created. Okay, so please explain to me scientifically how the universe was created without contradicting the laws of thermodynamics. You just can't do it, okay? Unless you have something outside the closed system, which would be God, the creator, something supernatural, something that supersedes nature, right? Okay, and then let's just talk about the second law of thermodynamics really quickly too, just to kind of drive the point home. Now, this is really where people are probably going to be critiquing me in the comments, being like, girl, you don't know anything about the second law of thermodynamics. You're right, I really don't. I really don't. I'm just going to put that out there right now. But I can read, and what I read is that our universe has entropy, okay? And entropy basically means that things have a tendency to be chaotic and unpredictable, right? So, like, the way I've kind of had it explained to me is like, okay, I don't even know if this is a good illustration, but like, if you put all of the pieces of a walkie-talkie. You break the walkie-talkie apart and you put it in, or a phone. Let's just go with an iPhone, okay? You take all the pieces of an iPhone apart and you put them in a drawer or a box or something, and you shake it up, okay? You shake up that box, and then you open the box, and is the phone all perfectly assembled? Or is it just chaotic, messy, unpredictable? Right? Like, it's not going to be put together. It's not going to be, it's going to be more chaotic and not more designed and more predictable. Okay. Our universe has a tendency for things to be chaotic. And so the fact that they want to say that, people who believe in evolution want to say that, all of this order, like we see all of this order in the world came from what was some chaotic, unpredictable gas and explosion. And I don't know about you guys if you've ever seen an explosion, but if I were to explode my house, do you think I would be able to create a skyscraper? Do you think, okay, I'm going to blow up my house, 3, 2, 1, bam, skyscraper. No, that makes no sense, right? Because my house doesn't have enough material for a skyscraper. And because the chances of all of the things in my house coming together to perfectly form a designed, structured, or orderly skyscraper, like explosions don't do that. They destroy stuff and make things chaotic, right? They don't put things nice and tidy. But somehow our earth is nice and tidy, right? Obviously there are kind of in a way, chaotic elements to it. But to say that, okay, this gaseous explosion made these galaxies that are perfectly functioning and made a solar system like ours that has this planet that's perfectly placed to be able to sustain life. And it just so happened that on that planet that is perfectly placed to sustain life and has all of the things, like oxygen and carbon dioxide and water and blah, 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 all these things. Not to mention like a hard ground to walk upon and things like that. Okay. And then all of the right elements also happened to magically appear and come together for a single-celled organism to become alive. Okay, that's weird. Where did that life come from? Like, where did the gas turn into a living thing? Okay, the only place I've ever seen something like that happen is in the movie Flubber, and I don't see anyone writing scientific journal papers on that. Okay, because it's nonsense. It's funny. It's ridiculous because it's not realistic whatsoever. Unless you believe in evolution, then you would believe that these gases exploded and somehow created a living single cell organism. I don't care how many cells an organism has, that I still have yet to see that be able to occur, for gases to explode and create something alive. I mean, if it was that easy, then how have we not created life yet? I mean, come on. But regardless, so then this single cell happened to figure out how to replicate, and then some spontaneous mutations occurred, and boom, now it's an organism with multiple cells. And then it progresses on, and now we have a little tadpole, a little fish, a little simple organism, and then it progresses further, and now we got a reptile, and then further and further and further, and now we have birds, and now further, and we have mammals. What? Why are things becoming more complex and more structured and more perfected over time? That is not how the law of entropy works whatsoever. And so I just bring these things up to say, like, if you are someone who believes in science, if you're someone who believes in evolution, if you're an atheist and you question the existence of God, I just challenge you to explain how any of this, any of the world that we know, has come about without contradicting the laws of thermodynamics. Because if you want to say, oh, well, the laws of thermodynamics didn't come into effect until later on. Okay, so then how did a universe that was born out of chaos and no life and no energy, how did that system create a system that has organization and energy and life and complexity and beauty? And I mean, like, just how did that come about without, where did it come from? Where did the energy come from? Okay, even if the energy, I don't know. You're saying the energy was there in the beginning. So then why is energy not being created all the time? Like, why is it just the one instance that energy was able to be created? But now we have a law that says energy can't be created and destroyed. Like, when did that happen? Energy was created at one point and now it's not created anymore, but it's also not destroyed. I don't know. It's not really making sense to me. And then, what about the second law of thermodynamics? What about entropy? Why is everything getting more complicated? Why is everything getting more structured? According to like evolution, that like beings are becoming more complex, more structured. How is that occurring? It seems to go against the laws of nature. So I think that there's two groups of people that, think about the beginning of the universe. There's people who believe in a closed system that has a miraculous contradictory event that occurred somehow, and they can't explain it, and they refuse to explain it. because they can't. There's no explanation of how that makes sense. And then there's people who look at this system and they say, yes, the majority of the time this is a closed system, but there is something outside the system, namely God, who does sometimes put his hand in the mix and mess with things a little bit. For the most part, he does not do that. And that's why nature is the way it is. That's why we have the laws that we have. That's why everything makes sense. And it's because it was created that way. It's because it was designed that way. I mean, just go look at a landscape, go look at a skeleton, go look at a cell, go find other people, go find music, and tell me that our world doesn't have design. It's just, to me, if you're thinking critically about things, even from a scientific perspective, you're going to find that there has to be a mover, there has to be a shaker, there has to be an instigator to all of this. And why would it not be God? I mean, our book claims he has power over nature, and there were many witnesses to it. And there are even people in the Bible who come up to him and they're like, what are you doing? Like, we disagree with you. And they're, and part of the reason they disagree with him and they're angry with him is because of the miracles he's doing. So why are they corroborating his story if they hate him so much? So I want you to just think critically about your beliefs. And I think if your beliefs can be taken down so easily, like if you just go to the very foundation of your belief and it crumbles there, then really none of the rest of it matters. Really, no other we don't need to have any other discussion, because your belief system sits on no foundation. And I'm sure that's really, a difficult thing to hear if that's where you are right now. And I'm sure it's infuriating. And, I'm not calling you stupid by any means. I think that we are really good at diverting, and we're like, well, what about this? You don't have an answer to this. And well, my answer, of course, would be that's where faith comes in. That's where I choose to believe that there are things that I don't understand, that God does. And that's okay. I don't have to know everything to be okay. Because at my very foundation, at my very core, I know what I believe and I know it makes sense. And you can point out that you disagree. You can point out that, I don't agree that God did all of that. You can disagree if you want, but there's nothing you can say to take down that belief in God, like I can take down your belief in the Big Bang or evolution. So just, again, something to think about. We have to think critically about these things. Because, again, otherwise we are in a very, very dangerous place with our faith and with our soul. Again, are we just believing the smartest person in the room? Because if not, that's changing day to day. And again, like if you listened to my last video, you would have heard me say that all we're doing when we choose to believe the smartest person in the room is still believing someone that is way, way, way more ignorant than God. And at the end of the day, we're putting faith in ourselves to discern who the smartest person is, to be able to follow them. So there's two human fallacies, because they don't have the wisdom that stacks up to God, and we don't have the wisdom to even discern who the smartest person in the world is. So that is my talk. That is what I have to say. I hope it gives you some things to think about. I hope it strengthens your faith. I hope it gives you confidence in why you believe what you believe, and that it's not crazy and your faith is not blind, and that God can and does coexist with what we know nature and science to be. And so I really hope that it gives you that confidence and gives you something to think about. So I really appreciate you guys clicking on this video today, and stay tuned for part 3. I'm going to try to broach the topic of critical thinking and philosophy. So that is a huge, huge undergoing, and it may actually take me an additional week, because I have our vacation Bible school this week, and then I'm going away to church camp. And so I may be slightly delayed on that third part of the video, but stay tuned because I promise it will be coming out super soon. So once again, thank you guys so much for joining, and I will see you in the next one.